I'm chair of Black Art and Design here at UAL. I'll just start by talking about the late 1970s, early 1980s, when a number of African and Asian artists who were British based kind of slowly came together to define what became termed the Black Art movement here in the UK. And a lot of the practices that they were involved with are practices that were happening not only amongst themselves but in art schools and in the art world anyway. So they were very much making work that was part of an ongoing dialogue about critical art practice. But what's happened is that there's been a kind of lapse of memory about the impact of some of the work that was being made, not only at that time but consequently. And so one of the things that Paul Goodwin, who's the other co-chair of Black Art and Design, and myself, what we've been trying to think about is how we reintroduce some of the debates, some of the art practices that were occurring through a kind of Black Arts movement back into the art college situation. So really to affect the curriculum in some ways.
I'm Anne Eggebert. I teach at Central St Martin's on the XD pathway. The XD pathway is part of BA Fine Art at Central St Martin's, and within this pathway what we're trying to do is interrogate the space between the studio and the public. So looking at all sorts of activities like socially engaged practice, collaboration, the street as a site for practice, working with other institutions, and generally trying to challenge where fine art can be located, what art can do within different contexts rather than what it might just be within the studio space. Sonia approached us with the idea that our students might support Claire Tancon's project Uphill Downhill at the Tate, and to see where that might go as a project that could extend across a longer period of time. And so we began to gather students who were interested. We did a series of seminars looking at what carnival could be in the broadest sense, as well as the history of carnival. And we tried to encourage students to think about carnival's potential as an art form in its own right and how they might respond to that.
So the event tonight is called Curating Carnival, and it's a project that Paul and I have been working with XD Pathway and Eggebert and Stephen Carter. We came to them in the spring of 2014 because we'd been contacted by a curator, an independent curator called Claire Tancon's. And much of what Claire Tancon's works on, a lot of her projects are about carnival as a performance practice, but also the question about public processions. So for a while she's been, or quite recently she's been working with people who are involved in the Occupy movement, and how art practice and activism kind of where they meet. And of course carnival, particularly its context here in the UK, has had a very fraught and troubled relationship with the establishments. What happened then in the spring was that the staff on XD Pathway then introduced the idea of possibly working with this idea of carnival with the students, and there were a whole range of sessions where students would go away and they'd do some research about the Notting Hill Carnival, and it became very clear in the process of doing that research that actually where St Martin's is now is literally on the doorstep of where the first West Indian Carnival took place, which was at Camden Town Hall in 1959, and actually the 30th of January 1959. And so quite early on in the process of doing research and thinking about what was going to happen at Tate, where they were going to reenact or consider the Turbine Hall as a street space in which they could have a carnival, quite early on the students agreed that they would like to do something to commemorate the first carnival, West Indian Carnival, that happened just across the road from where we are now.
A number of the students who worked with us at Tate have developed the ideas that they began with there, and so some of the influences from the Tate event have been carried through and tested and pulled around. And we've been lucky enough to have some of the materials from the professional artists, so Gia Wolf's red rope and Marlon Griffith's bird-like costumes, that hummingbird-like costumes that they used for the Tate event, have come into the building here. So what they're trying to do is look at the relationship, the physical relationship between the architectural space here as in relation to that of the Tate. So we've got quite a similar post-industrial space that the building occupies here. So testing what could be done here, and they'll begin with various mobile sculptures, projection, video projections, a soundscape by Dubmorphology that they've contributed to, beginning with a few slow dance movements around I think we could call her a goddess, couldn't we? This curious large structure. And then from there with some face painting involved, and not quite the face painting you've experienced at Children's Fate, something a little bit different. And then there's a process of crowning the rope goddesses, or queens, rope queens, who then begin to unravel some of Gia Wolf's rope, which is this huge, heavy, plastic, pink rope that was installed across the turbine hall. So they're going to be unravelling, and then some tricksters come into play, which reference football chanting and procession from the north of England, so Newcastle. Then we have some of Marlon's costumes have been reconfigured and will come into the performance, and some mirror pieces. And then there's a final promenade where everyone leads off, and hopefully the audience will follow. And this is all to this soundscape that Dubmorphology have produced in discussion with the students over a period of months, and sounds that they've gathered, and some really interesting video pieces alongside that as well. We've been looking at sites of protest, the street, the historical promenade or pageant, movements in the street, whether they're a political protest or more folk oriented activity. So looking at things like European as well as Afro-Caribbean historical carnival events that are often related to religion. So for example, where the boy becomes the bishop, or the power relations are inverted in the carnivalesque, where perhaps the king becomes the fool, and so on.